what we're going to do, and I'm going to get my full hour out of this. As you know, I usually go way over, but I'm going to try to keep it to 1 hour. We have been having a problem because with the historical critique, we haven't been able to get Muslims to debate us on it. And we do need Muslims to debate us. We need to have that give back, that take back, and that, well, feedback to be peer reviewed, so to speak. And so it's been fascinating because in order to do that, we've had to go to Christians to actually debate us. And about a month and a half ago, Raymond Ibrahim, anybody know who Raymond Ibrahim is? He is a big name on the internet. He's from America. I think he's Egyptian background, knows Arabic, and has been very good on confronting Islam, but not the historical critique. And so he put up 2 videos. I think it was in April 7th and April 9th. There he is there. Why I believe in Muhammad. Of course he's real, was the first one. And the second one he did on the 9th was Muhammad did not exist, the weakest polemic against Islam. Why Muslims laugh at claims against Muhammad's existence. Finally, we have an academic who's taken us on and is trying to come up with some rebuttal to what we're saying. So I was sent this from a lot of big people, said, Jay, you've got to answer this. So what I'm going to do tonight, instead of going through and do an overview of what the historical critique is, I'm going to answer his questions. He gave 10 challenges against the historical critique. What better way to actually confront and show what the problem is with his questions than to do it in front of you? All right? Because I'm sure some of you have these questions. And if you don't, well, please do have these questions, because if you don't know what the questions are, you're not going to know what the answers are. So if you use this material, you need to know what you're going to get hit with. So let's go through it. These 10 historical challenges, 10 suppositions. Number 1, he says that Muhammad is much more historically supported than Jesus. How many people believe that? Raise your hands. Not one. Wow. Looks like I'm talking to a converted crowd. Number 2, what about the Sunni Shiite divide? What are you going to do with that if there was no Muhammad? Number 3, there are no incontrovertible proofs of Muhammad's non-existence. There's a double negative. Boy, that's really confusing. Number 4, why would Muslims create such an embarrassing paradigm for themselves? Number 5, Mecca is not an argument against Muhammad. Oh, that's a good one. That's number 6. What happened to number 5? Okay, well, we're missing one. Nothing historical can be really proven or disproven. Well, I can prove something right that's not historical, and that's number 5. Number 8, it all comes down to a matter of faith. Number 9, claims against Muhammad cannot be proven, so are merely academic and subjective. And then number 10, the best response to change Muslim minds is to confront the Islamic traditions. In other words, the internal critique. And he's very good on the internal critique, and so are most people in this audience good on the internal critique. So what he has done, what I want to do is to take each one of those 10, including number 5 that's missing, and try to answer them, respond to them, and then see what Bob does with them in the panel afterwards. So here we go. Muhammad is so much more historically supported than Jesus, yet we accept Jesus' historicity, so isn't this hypocritical? His quote, I find it amazing that whereas Christians rightfully cite Josephus and Pliny and Tacitus as early proof of Christ's existence, in other words, in the 1st and 2nd century, the non-Muslim references to Muhammad, which objectively speaking are even more compelling, since they were all written much closer to their subject's life, in other words, the 9th and 10th centuries, yet are dismissed as irrelevant by those who would make him a figment of our imagination. So therefore, what he's claiming is that Muhammad is far more historically supported than Jesus Christ. And by denying his historicity, we are not only being inconsistent, but possibly dishonest. So, is the historical support for Muhammad greater than that of Jesus Christ? Let's find out. Here's my response. To start with, let's go ahead and see what the Muslims claim so we know what we're responding to. And what the Muslims claim is this. They would claim that Muhammad's empire included that brown area. So just that area there, or, oh boy, I'm going through the thing, right that area there, very small area. You see what I'm saying? Just that, not very big. After he dies in 632, it then expands to the orange area. That's the Rashidun period. That's the period of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, the 4 rightly guided caliphs, up until 661. Then after the Abbasids come to power in 749, 750, it then expands to the purple area, and it includes all the way from Andalusia, which is Spain today, all the way to India in the east, from Turkey in the north down to Yemen in the south. Now, we're not really interested in the purple area. We're much more interested in the orange and the brown area, and that's the material that I'm going to show where the problems exist. According to their timeline, according to the standard Islamic narrative, what they tell us is that Muhammad was born in 570, that he started receiving the Quran in 610 in Mecca. So he was born in Mecca. It was not till he was 50 years old that he started, 40 years old that he started receiving the Quran. Boy, get my math right. 40 years he started receiving the Quran. In 621, he's woken up in the middle of the night, told to get on the back of the winged horse, and he flies up from Mecca up to Jerusalem, goes up to the seven heavens, and gets the 50 prayers. Hits the fifth heaven, finds out from Moses that's too many, so he bounces back and forth between the seventh and fifth heaven, and brings it down from 45 to 30 to 15 down to 5 prayers, comes back down to Jerusalem, gets on back the winged horse, and flies back down to Mecca. So that's 621. The next year, he then goes from Mecca to Medina with maybe 80 to 200 of his followers. It depends on which tradition you look at. And then in 630, he comes back to Mecca and walks in without firing a shot, takes over Mecca, and then he dies in 632. So that's the life of Muhammad right there, okay? From 570 to 632. Now, Abu Bakr comes immediately after. He only lasts about 2 years before he dies peacefully, fortunately. He is replaced by Umar, who lasts for 12 years. He is killed. But he expands the borders much more so than anybody else during his reign. When he is killed, Uthman takes over. He lasts only 12 years. And while he is on the throne as a caliph in Medina, he then compiles the Quran, and that's 652. He is then killed, and Ali takes over. He only lasts 5 years before he is killed by Muawiyah at the Battle of Siffin. So that is the timeline that they give us. I'm not going through the whole timeline. I'm just giving little bits and pieces just to get the skeleton, all right? What that means is that Islam was fully formed in the Hijaz by 661 according to the standard Islamic narrative. This is what all of you believe. Well, okay, many of you have been listening to me, but before, if the first time you've heard me, this is what you've all been told, right? Just say yes, okay? Be obedient. This is all you've ever heard. This is what every story is. This is what they teach you at school. This is what is in the newspapers. Everybody believes this story for a very good reason. It's the only story out there. That's the only thing you can ever hear. But how do we know the above? Where does the material come from? Where does the information come from to support that timeline, to support those events? Well, you need to ask the Muslims, and they'll say it comes from the Islamic traditions. What do we mean by the Islamic traditions? Well, Muhammad dies in 632, and immediately the biography is put together. No, not immediately. It is not put together by anybody that knew Muhammad. Muslims say the first one to write down his biography is this guy, Ibn Ishaq. But do we have any reference? Do we have any codex from him? Is there anything written by him? Not at all. So we can't go to Ibn Ishaq. We have to go to this guy, Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham takes what students from Ibn Ishaq tell him to give, but he just throws away some and keeps whatever he wants. Basically, he just deletes and accretes as he goes by. So what we know about Muhammad comes from this guy here. Look at the date, 833. We also have Al-Waqidi, who gives us the stories of the wars, the Maghazi documents. He dies in 835, both 9th century. Let's get rid of Ibn Ishaq since we don't need him anymore, since we have nothing from him, okay? I get rid of him for a very good reason. If you have nothing for him, you get rid of him. Am I correct? Do you see the criteria I'm using? If there's nothing there, if there's nothing to look at, if you have no evidence, you go with the evidence on the ground. And we do have Ibn Hisham. Boy, did I get that wrong. Now, that's not the only genre. You also have what we call the hadith, the sayings of Muhammad, first introduced by this guy, Al-Bukhari, 870, then Al-Sahih Muslim, 875, Tirmidhi, 884. Look in the dates. Ibn Majah, 887, Ibn Dawud, 899, An-Nasai, 915. So those are the 6 major hadith compilations. Notice they're all 9th and 10th century. And then we have 2 more genres, the tafsir and the tahriq, the commentaries, and the histories of mankind, first introduced by Al-Tabari. Well, folks, do you see a problem there? I'm showing it to you. There's 200-year gap. Are you satisfied with that? It's as if I were to say, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not live in the 1st century. They all lived in the 3rd century, and they lived hundreds of miles away, and they redacted back to a man named Jesus. Would you trust it? No. Thank you. I got a good crowd here today. But we're gonna continue on. I want to just bring this guy, Abdul Malik, up because he is the first one to introduce the name, did I say Muhammad? No. He is the first one to introduce the name Muhammad. Hold that. That's going to come important in just a bit. And it's these people, the Abbasids, who actually introduce us to Muhammad himself. The Muhammad of Islam are really created by these individuals. But look when they come to power. 750. When did Muhammad die? 632. So the conclusion is, Muhammad was revealed 84 years after the Abbasids created him, 141 years after he was first introduced, yet 201 years after he supposedly lived. Ibrahim, therefore, Raymond Ibrahim, considers this 200-year gap as perfectly acceptable and thus not a problem. To me, that's a problem, folks. That's a huge problem. But it's not just the dates. What about the places? What about where these men were living when they wrote it down? Now, according to what Muslims tell us, everything happens where those 2 green circles are, Mecca and Medina. That's the Hijaz. However, all of the writers were writing way up in Baghdad, which is 1,200 miles away. We know that Ibn Hisham, who writes the Sirah, he's the first one to do that. He was born in Basra, grew up in Cairo, wrote in Baghdad. That's 990, 1,200, and miles. I'm sorry I'm not using, you're miles here, so I can use miles. When we come to al-Bukhari, he's way over in Uzbekistan. He lives in Bukhara, which is 2,600 miles away. Al-Tabari, who writes the first to write the Tafsir and the Tahriq, is in what is today northern Iran, in Tabaristan. That's 1,700 miles away. None of these men lived or worked in Mecca and Medina. They were way too far to the north and came from the west and east of Baghdad. I just went out. Oh, there we go. See, even my projector is flabbergasted. Now, folks, what about the historical record for Christianity? Do we not have the same problem? So we need to ask and we need to demand the same thing of both sides. So let's look at the historical record. And let's ask, see, basically because if you look at these 4 genres, the Sirah, the Hadith, the Tafsir, and the Tahriq, those are the same genre we have in the New Testament. The Sirah of Jesus, the biography of Jesus, would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right? That's who write down what he did. The Hadith of Jesus would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John whenever he spoke. So in some of your Bibles, it's written in the letter red. Okay, so there's the Hadith of Jesus. The Tafsir of Jesus would be what Paul took and wrote for each church, the commentaries on what Jesus said in Philippi, in Ephesus, in Corinth. So that would be the Tafsir of Jesus. And then the Tahriq would be the history of the early church. Well, that was done by Luke in the book of Acts. So there's the same exact 4 genres that we have in the Islamic traditions. Like with like, okay? So let's look and ask, when were they written down? Here we go. So the first is the Tahriq, which would be the book of Acts. Now, I'm going to step on a lot of your toes. You're not going to agree with these dates. I'm taking the most liberal dates I can find. These are not ones that you really believe, so I'm going to step on your toes to make a point. So the Tahriq of the book of Acts, written between 52 and 62 AD by Luke. So that's within 20 to 30 years of Christ's death. You have Paul's letters were written between 48 and 65 AD when he was killed. That's within 50 to 34 years after Christ's death. The first Sirah and the first Hadith written by Mark is at 70 AD. That's 37 years after Christ's death. You get 2 more come from Matthew and Luke in 80 AD. That's 47 years. And then you have the final Sirah and the final Hadith. It's 57 years, which means between 29 and 50 years of Christ's death, we have the entire Sirah, Hadith, Tafsir, and Tahriq of Jesus. What's more, all of these writers lived in the same place Jesus lived. And they either knew him personally, like John and Matthew, or they got the material from others who did know them, like Mark and Luke. Therefore, they're much closer to the event and also at the same time. When you do a comparison between these two, notice that we have everything about what Jesus did, said, and how Christianity began within 60 years of Christ's death. Islam has nothing for 200 to 300 years. Which is the most authoritative? Coming and going, we have them on this. Well, I don't know what Raymond Ibrahim is reading. If we had to depend, and this is what I would say to Raymond Ibrahim, as a comparison, if we had to depend on sources for Jesus, compared to what Muslims are dependent on for Muhammad, Jesus would not begin to appear until the 3rd century. How would we defend him? with statistics like these, how can Ibrahim suggest that Muhammad is much more historically supported than Jesus? But which Muhammad is Ibrahim talking about? Which is the Muhammad he's referring to? The Muhammad of Islam, he's referring to, require 4 things. To be the Muhammad of Islam, he must have used the name Muhammad, that word right there. There it is, mim ha mim dal with a dama, fatah, and a fatah. You have to use that word to get Muhammad, right? So it has to be that name that we're looking for. Secondly, he must live in the city of Mecca. There it is. You must have a place called Mecca for him to live, because he was there from 570 to 622. For 52 years he lived there. Thirdly, he had to have received, that Muhammad had to receive the Quran, all 114 surahs, by the time he died. And then number 4, he had to exist in the 7th century. So you have to have basically all 4 of the above criteria, the man, the place, the book, and the time, must be fulfilled in order to prove that the Muhammad of Islam actually existed. Who can do that right now? Ooh, this makes my job so easy. Okay, let's go ahead. So let's start with the name. Ibrahim suggests that we can find the name Muhammad in a written text. Muhammad's everywhere, he's saying. It's much more, factually, much more so than the name of Jesus. But in order to have that word Muhammad, you need 4 consonants. Mim, ha, mim, dal. Or this way, mim, ha, mim, dal, going your direction. And you have to have 3 vowels. Dama, fatah, and a fatah, right? To do so. In the 7th century in Arabic, there were no vowels. There were only consonantal letters, 16 of them. The vowels were only created in the 8th and late 9th century. In fact, were only canonized until the 9th century. So you can't have Muhammad. Take a look at the text. Look at the Ma'il. There's the Samarkand. I'm putting up the Petropolitanus. Well, I thought I was. The Sana and the Topkapi manuscript. Do you see any vowels on any of them? Those are 5 of the 6 earliest manuscripts. Do you see any 28 letters in them? Today you have 28 letters, and that's how you can get Muhammad, with 28 letters. But back in the 7th century, there were only 16 letters, and there was only a mim ha mim dal. Mim ha mim dal. Let's show you exactly what I'm talking about. So, today, this is what Muhammad looks like. That's what he looks like today. Without the vowels, however, you take the vowels out, and what do you have? That's what you have. Mim ha mim dal, no vowels. How then would you pronounce that word? Go ahead, try it. How do you get the oo? Where'd you get that from? You're just making it up, aren't you? Shouldn't we go back to the 7th and 8th century and find out how it was pronounced? Would you like to do that? So we should looking for Muhammad, not Muhammad. We should be going to the 7th century and seeing how they used it, how they pronounced it, what they did use. So how is it pronounced? Why don't we go to John of Damascus? John of Damascus is writing about Muhammad. He is writing it in his greatest tome in 730. He was there under Abd al-Malik. He was the treasurer in the courts of Abd al-Malik from 685 up to 705. He then left Abd al-Malik's court, and then he went down to Jerusalem. He went into retirement. And there at a monastery, he wrote his greatest masterpiece. Look at the word, look at the title of the masterpiece. The Heresy of the Ishmaelites. Heresy means what? It's against another religion. So it has to be a heresy against Christianity. And who? The Ishmaelites. Why doesn't he call them Muslims? He's writing this in 730. This is a whole 100 years after Muhammad. And what does he talk about? The Muhammad. Look how he writes it in Greek. In Greek, there are vowels. Look at the vowels right there, folks. Can you see the vowels? Muhammad. It's so simple. Just read the Greek. And from that time until now, a false prophet called Muhammad sprang among them, who after conversing with an Arian monk concerning the Old and New Testament, fabricated his own heresy. So he is a heretic, a heresy of an Arian heresy. Are you following that? Just read the text. Let's continue on. So what does Muhammad mean in Arabic? Well, this is why I had to redo my entire PowerPoint, because our good friend Mel did everything for me this morning. How many were here this morning? Shame on the rest of you for not, because he did a slap-up job going through inscription after inscription after inscription, 7 to 8 inscriptions showing this word. It's all over the place in that part of the world. It means the praised one. It means the blessed one. It means the anointed one. It's not a name. It's a title. Muhammad has always been a title. It even means the Messiah later on. It was first used in Ugaritic in the 1400 BC, and then it was used in Hebrew in 1000 BC. In fact, it's found 11 times in our Old Testament. Muhammad is found all over. Mahmadim is found all over in the Old Testament. Song of Solomon 5:16, Mahmadin, altogether lovely, referring to Solomon. It was subsequently employed by St. Ambrose in the 4th century AD as a title for Jesus Christ, the Messiah. From the 4th century, other church fathers employed Muhammad to refer to Jesus Christ himself. Good, look at these examples. Origen in the 3rd century, St. Ambrose in the 4th century. Origen said that it interpreted the Song of Solomon's 5:16 passage as the unique scripture where the eschatological nuptials of Christ and his bride are present. St. Ambrose then in the 4th century introduced the idea that the Song of Solomon 5:16 passage referred to Muhammad was to be considered a title for Jesus Christ. Gregory of Elvira in the late 4th century, St. John Cassian in the 5th century, St. Augustine in the 5th century, all then referred to Muhammad as the Messiah, as Jesus Christ. Therefore, in the 7th century, this was picked up by Apollonius himself. So the Muhammad was common title for Jesus by the 7th century in the church in that part of the world. So we should not be surprised when we find it written in many places at that time. But the Jews also considered the Muhammad as the anointed one, not just the Christians. Notice the 523 inscription that Mel referred to this morning. The 6th century Jewish rock inscription. Found in Yemen, what is today Yemen. It is part of the Jewish Himyaritic inscription dated to 523. And the translation is Rab Had Mahmad. But take a look and see the word. There it is. I'm going to make it out for you. Can you see the Mim Ha Mim Dal? This is Sabbaic Arabic, but it's still Arabic. It's just written with a different script. Interestingly, this would be the script that the Quran should have been written in. Does that look like the Quranic script? Ooh, that is not the Quranic script. Oh, I love this. That is Sabbaic script. Yet it's still Arabic, and yet it's way down in Yemen. So, Muhammad means praised one, blessed one, anointed one, even Messiah. It was always a title introduced by the Ugaritic, borrowed by the Hebrews. It's right through our Old Testament, subsequently employed by St. Ambrose as a title for Jesus. The Jews also took it from the 6th century on, referring in. There are 7 to 8 inscriptions that Mel introduced this morning, showing it over and over and over again. Muhammad is both there for the Jews and the Christians. By the 7th century, the Christians used Muhammad to refer to the returning Messiah, who is going to come a second time, while the Jews used Muhammad to refer to the Messiah yet to come, and at times interchanging it with Messiah. Conclusion? Therefore, the term Muhammad was well known in that part of the world and at that time, but it was not pronounced as Muhammad. That is how we pronounce it today, and that has been our problem. Even Mel made that mistake this morning. How many times did you say Muhammad? I almost jumped up and said, would you shut up and stop calling him Muhammad? It's always been Muhammad. Read it as it should. And that is why there's so much confusion, and including why Ibrahim is so confused. Knowing that, let's now look to see exactly when his story was created within Islam itself. Now here it is. Remember, I've just been telling you that everything we know about this man Muhammad, everything that has happened with him, everything we know about how Islam began, it was written down by these men in the 9th and 10th century. I lied. I didn't mean to. I didn't know I had lied. But something has happened in the last 2 years. And the man who's done all the work just walked out about 10 minutes ago. Pat Andrews. Who all of you know who Dr. Pat Andrews is? Just raise your hand. There's his son right there. Dr. Pat Andrews is one of the best men I know in the world today, who is actually going and researching. When you ask him to do something to research, he will give you an 83-page document the next day. I kid you not. The guy is voracious. The guy is amazing, the ability he has. And for the last 2 years, he has been going out and trying to find out where are all the antecedents. Not the antecedents, where are all the extant manuscripts? All the extant manuscripts for the hadith, for the Sirah, for the Tafsir, for the Tahrir. Where did Ibn Hisham, where is his manuscript? Because if you don't have a manuscript, then you can't say it comes from Ibn Hisham, right? Did you see me get rid of Ibn Ishaq? We don't have his manuscripts, so you get rid of him. So where is Ibn Hisham's manuscripts, folks? Why have we haven't asked that before? Where is Al-Waqid's manuscript? Where is, well, let's start with all of them. Bukhari, Muslim, Dawud. Tirmidhi, Majah, Nisai. What about Al-Tabari? Where are any of their manuscripts? That's all we're going to ask. What Muslims will do is they'll take off this book, and they'll take off this book, and they'll take off this book, and they'll give you reference after reference after reference. Oh, here is Majah, here is Nisai. And they all say that these are all 9th and 10th century manuscripts. Boy, do they lie. Don't trust them, because they have no idea. You say, could you tell me, can you prove it? And they'll look up at the front and say, printed in 1977, printed in 2015. But they have no idea what the original manuscripts for any of those are. So we decided to do, or I should say Dr. Pat Andrews for 2 years has decided to do just that. And what he did is he went back to the original manuscripts. Now remember, manuscripts in the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th and on route were all written on vellum. We don't have the original manuscripts for our Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because they are written on papyrus. Papyrus are interlocking leaves that disintegrate within 100 years. So we would not expect to find our original text. Muslims cannot make that excuse, because every one of those guys that I put up there, Ibn Hisham, Al-Waqidi, Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, all of them, they were all working in the caliphal courts. They were with a very wealthy caliph. Caliphs do not use papyrus. They use parchment. They use vellum. They use animal skins, which would be just as resilient today as the day that they were written on. So they cannot make the same excuse that we use. Don't let them get away with that. So what I want to do, and what we decided to do, let's go back. Let's find out what we know about these extant manuscripts. Let's go to the Sirah, his biography. Let's go to the Hadith, his sayings. Let's go to the Sahaba codices. This is the new one they're throwing at us. Who are the Sahaba? The companions of the Prophet himself. Let's go to the Tabi'un. Who are the Tabi'un? Those are the ones who get it from the Sahaba. So they're the second generation. So the Sahaba for us would be Matthew and John. The Tabi'un would be Luke and Mark. Okay, do you see the parallels? Those who actually were with Jesus, they would be the Sahaba, the companions of Jesus. Those who got it from those who were with Jesus would be the Tabi'un. That's the equivalent. So the Muslims are claiming that they have the Sahaba, they have the Tabi'un. They also believe that they also have the Tariq and the Tafsir, the originals. They have no idea what we have now found. The claim is that the Sahaba and the Tabi'un were right there with Muhammad. So they're from the 7th and 8th century. Well, let's just say 7th. This is a lie. None of them are. But this is what they say. They're from the 7th and 8th century. No. The Muwatta ibn Malik is from the 9th century. That's 200 years later. The Sahifa Himam ibn Manabi, which is one of their favorites, is from the 12th century. That's 500 years later. The Musnad ibn Hanbal is from the 13th century, 600 years later. Same with the Musnad Abdul al-Razak, 13th century, 600 years later. The Musnad al-Tayalisi, 13th century, 600 years later. Abu Shaiba, 13th century, 600 years later. Conclusion, these documents were all supposedly created in the 7th century, yet they don't begin to appear until the 9th to 13th century, thus from 200 to 600 years too late. These suggest that they are all written by others hundreds of years later. Consequently, they are all redacted attributions. Let's put it on a timeline. I'm going to make it as visual as I can for you. So that's what they claim right there, okay? Malik, Munabi, Hanbal, Razak, Tayalisi, and Shaiba. They would claim they're all writing at that time period. No, they're not, folks. They don't even begin to appear until, there we go, bouncing in 9th century, 12th century, 13th century, 13th century, 13th century. Visually, can you see what's going on here, folks? None of these are close to Muhammad. Let's get rid of them. Bye-bye. We don't need them anymore. Conclusion, all Muslim scholars believe that the stories surrounding Muhammad's life were written by the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, first and second generations from the Prophet, thus by eyewitnesses. Yet we now find that they were all written 200 to 600 years later and simply redacted back to the 7th and 8th century. Thus, they are all probably fraudulent. Now, recently the Muslims they realized they've been following what I'm doing on the internet, so they said, Mr. Smith, you don't know. What about, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. What about the Muwatta of Ibn Malik? That's the one that they're jumping on right now. They like the Muwatta Ibn Malik because that one, they say, is 9th century. There's a partial copy of Muwatta in Dublin's Chester Beatty Library. It is described as a second third of a celebrated treatise on Islamic prudence. So it's not even a complete one. It's just a second third. It's dated to 890. That is as close as they're going to get, but that's a partial copy. The full copy of the Muwatta is dated to 1030 AD in the Maghrebi Andalusian province. So the earliest copy you can get is 1030. That is the 11th century, folks, for the complete copy. Most importantly, the Muwatta is only about rules of jurisprudence and not anything about early Islam. So it's not part of this discussion. It doesn't tell us who Muhammad was or what he did or what he said or how Islam began. It's all about Islamic law, which of course we know existed in the 9th century because it's straight Roman law. Patricia Crone shut that one down in 1987. Let's continue on. So throw Muawiyah, but hold on, let's go back to the timeline. Let's put Muwatta where it belongs. So they always said it belonged there, right, with the other ones, hugging up against the other ones. They claimed it was there, but actually it wasn't there. What we now know is the Muwatta is there. So goodbye. It doesn't belong there. We'll get rid of all of them. So now what we're knowing is all the Sabiyun and all the the Sahaba and the Tabi'un are from the 11th century and later, all right, which is 400 to 600 years later. Now let's go then and let's look at the Sirah. This is the biography of Muhammad that everybody must know to use to know what Muhammad did. And it all comes from that book there. That's the book you all use. If you haven't, get it, because that's this classical book. You don't have to take pictures of Francisco. I'm going to give you the PowerPoint, so you get it all. Sit down, because he doesn't need to do that. Folks, you will get the PowerPoint for all of this, all right? Let's go through and let's go look at the 36 different biographies that existed. But the man that wrote that put it together was this man here, Heinrich Ferdinand Wustenfeld, between 1858 and 1860. He is the one that actually wrote it down. And then it was translated into French and English and sanitized by Guillaume later on. Now, the man who Muslims are dependent on to know who their prophet is or what he did is an elderly German linguist who wrote Muhammad's story 160 years ago, thus over 1,000 years too late. But where did he get his material from? You want to know where? From 6 manuscripts. Now, what Muslims say is he should have got it from these 2 manuscripts, Ibn Hisham and al-Waqidi. Didn't I just get saying that about 10 minutes ago? Shame on me. I was wrong. There is no Ibn Hisham manuscript. We can't find anything from Ibn Hisham. We can't find anything from al-Waqidi. In order for him to write his biography that we all use today, he had to go to this manuscript, the Fez manuscript in Morocco, 1063, the British Library manuscript, 1278, the Bodleian Library manuscript in Oxford, 1324, the Dublin manuscript, which is 1331, the Bibliothèque Nationale manuscript in Paris, which is 1420, and most importantly, to the SOAS Library manuscript, which is 1589. Do you see a problem there, folks? Immediately you can see a problem. Everything is compiled between the 11th and the 19th century, thus 400 to 1,200 years too late. We'll get rid of the earliest ones, proving that most everything that he had to use are all too late. 400 to 1,200 years too late, to be exact. Let's now go to the Hadith. Who really created the 9th and 10th century Hadith writings? Muslims claim that the Hadith were compiled between the 9th and 10th century, but you can see this is a lie as well. Let's see when the earliest extant manuscript. Abu Dawud, 11th century, not 9th century. An-Nasai, 12th century, not 9th century. That's 500 years after Muhammad. Ibn Majah, 13th century. That's 600 years after Muhammad. Jami' al-Tirmidhi, 14th century. That's 700 years after Muhammad. Now, are you ready? The 2 most important, here we go. Sahih Muslim, 14th century. That's 700 years after Muhammad. And the most important, Sahih Bukhari, 14th and 15th century, when it was finally all compiled in 9 volumes. That's 700 to 800 years. Muslims cannot do without Bukhari. You have to know al-Bukhari. You don't even know how the Quran's put together without al-Bukhari. But notice the dates where all those are. Not one of the hadith were compiled in the 9th and 10th century. Their final extant manuscripts were not created until, and I just lost my thing again. Is something going on? Until the 11th to 15th century, which is 400 to 800 years later. Thus, not one of them ever heard a word Muhammad said. Let's put it on a timeline, just so you get a visual. That's when they claim all of the hadith were put together, 200 to 300 years. That's bad enough. But Dawud is 11th century, Nasai is 12th century, Majah is 13th, same with Tirmidhi, 14th, and Muslim and Bukhari, 14th and 15th century. Bye-bye to their claims. Now let's go to the last and the final one, and this is the Tafsir and the Tahriq. They claim were put together by this guy Al-Tabari, who died in 923. Folks, no, they weren't. The edition of the Al-Tabari, which everyone used today, was compiled by a man named Michael Jan de Geuze, I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, the professor of Arabic at the Leiden University in Holland between 1879 and 1901, and is known as the Leiden edition. So a Dutchman put it together. It's a Dutchman we have to give thanks for. But did he get it from Al-Tabari? No. He went to what? He went to those two manuscripts, which are still in Turkey today, written in 1244 and 1253. Therefore, folks, everything we know about the Tafsir and the Tariq do not come from Al-Tabari. They come from those manuscripts that are in Turkey from the 13th century, 600 years too late, but not compiled until 1,200 years later. So, I'm going to do everything on one slide. Here we go. This is what you can take and give to Muslims. So, we were told that the Sahaba and the Tabi'un write all their manuscripts there. No, they don't. They write them there. And there. I'm sorry. Get rid of the Tabi'un. Then we're told that all the... Boy, something's wrong with this clicker. Is there any way we can fix it? The Hadith were written there. But no, they don't. What we're finding out now, they're written there and there and there. Look at that. All of these, 14th and 15th century. Get rid of the Hadith. We're told that all of the Sirah are written 9th century. No, they're not. They all come in the 11th to the 15th century. Bouncing in. Way, way too late. And then compiled by this guy here, the German scholar, in the 19th century. And then we're told that the Tafsir and the Tariq were written in the 10th century. No, they aren't. They're from two manuscripts in the 13th century, but written by Dutchmen in the last century. So, put it all in one graph. Muslims claim that everything we know about Muhammad, about how Islam began, about the origins of Islam, are from that period, 200 to 300 years. What we're finding is that none of them is from that period. They all start to be introduced after the 11th century. So let's put a big X there. There's nothing from that time period. So how can our good friend Raymond Ibrahim, say that they know who Muhammad is or how Islam began, when you have nothing for 400 to 900 years after the fact? There it is all in one slide. Now, before we get too proud, we as Christians have the same problem. We do have documents that are much later. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gnostic Gospel, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Barnabas. These are Gospels that are written much later, folks, and they're all written by Thomas and Judas and Barnabas. How many people believe that Thomas, Judas, and Barnabas wrote any of them? And why is it you don't believe they wrote them? Well, just look at the content to begin with. They completely contradict, but look and see when those documents were written. They're all written in the 2nd, 3rd. The Gospel of Barnabas, goodness sakes, that was written in 1634. Redacted back to someone named Thomas, redacted back to Judas, redacted back to Barnabas. But none of us use them in any of our seminaries or Bible school. Why? Because they're written so late. If they're written so late, you throw them out. That's what Christians do. Muslims do just the opposite. They take the latest stuff, they take the latest material they have, which is from the 11th to the 16th century, written in the 18th and 19th century. They use that material and forget about the earliest. Because why? Because there is nothing early. Like with like, do you see why we are so much way farther ahead of them? What does this all mean? We're not suggesting that there never was someone named Ibn Hisham or Al-Waqidi or Al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or Tabari. I'm not saying that. There could very well have been those individuals or any of the other traditional writers. These men could very well have lived in the 9th and 10th centuries. I'm willing to say that, which where they're attributed. Thomas and Judas and even Barnabas were very real men who were historical characters in the early church and well respected. And that was why the later compilers attributed their works to them in order to get authority for them. Similarly, that is why I believe later Muslims attributed the stories to these earlier men, because they needed their authority. Consequently, what Muslims today, but let me just back up. How many were at Odin's talk this afternoon? What did Odin say? Notice what Odin said. Everything is accretion and deletion and accretion and deletion and accretion. Remember that? A whole corpus of accretions and deletions, and finally they start putting it down in the 11th century. Odin, you didn't know how correct you were. Now can you understand how all the manuscripts start to appear in the 11th century? And you hadn't even seen what we have found. Can you see how it all fits together, folks? It's the 11th century that you finally got all of this. But what happens in the 11th and 12th century, and where did almost all those extant manuscripts, well, look at the dates, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th. Who was in power at that time? Ottomans. Much of this is Ottoman material, redacted back to someone named Ibn Hisham, redacted back to Al-Waqidi, to Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, who could have existed, but we have none of their manuscripts. They've been destroyed and deleted and accreted, and over hundreds of years, finally they started writing them down, and still they started changing them and changing. Why do you think Al-Bukhari is the last to finally be written down? Because he is the one that everybody has to use. That's why he's so famous. And that's why all of you guys who like to shut down Muhammad, you use Al-Bukhari more than any other. And they call him Sahih. Why do you think they call him Sahih? Because he's the final product of what Islam finally came to, and it didn't happen until the Ottoman period. So which Muhammad are you talking about? Similarly, that is why I believe Muslims attributed these stories to these earlier men. Consequently, what Muslims today contend these traditional writers wrote, they have no support for historically, since they have little to nothing of what they wrote outside of the Muwatta, which has not even anything to do with early Islam. It's Islamic law. All that Muslims can now be certain of is what the later Abbasids and even the earlier Ottomans believed happened in the 7th and 8th centuries, since everything that has been written earlier had been destroyed and then replaced with completely new stories to fit a new agenda. Conclusion, when compared to Christianity, which has manuscript evidence which within the 1st century, Islam is much less historically supported, contrary to what Ibrahim contends. Yet it should not be considered, yet it shouldn't be, considering how recent it was supposedly created, and all of it written on animal skins. Animal skins do not deteriorate. They get destroyed. They get written over top of. That's called palimpsests. Now, oh boy, I'm only on number 2 and I only have 15 minutes to go. Let's go real quick. So, evidence for Muhammad. There are so many very early 7th century, he says, references to Muhammad, therefore you have to accept him. And these were all within 2 years after he died, they start writing him, whereas the first non-Christian references to Jesus don't appear until 60 years after he died. Examples, the Doctrine of Jacobi, the Thomas of Presbyter, Syriac Flyleaf Fragment, and the Coptic Bishop. He only gave us 4 examples. There's actually 11 good ones, 15 pretty good ones, but he should have gone to the 11 ones, but he's used 4 of the probably better ones because those, at least 3 of those 4 have the word Muhammad in them, though he calls it Muhammad. Don't ever call it Muhammad again. And that's his problem. He doesn't know that these aren't Muhammad. Let's start with the Doctrine of Jacobi. This is a Greek Christian polemical tract from Carthage, but written by Palestine by a Christian apologist. It refers to a Saracen prophet with a sword who has the keys to paradise. So that must be Muhammad, right? Problems here. Saracen prophet cannot say the Christ who is yet to come, because in chapter 33 or 40 of the Quran, Muhammad is the last prophet. So what other prophet comes after him? It assumes Muhammad is alive in 634, but the traditions say he died in 632. The keys to paradise actually comes from Matthew 16, verse 19, and refers to the Peter's papal authority in the Catholic Church. This also fits much more of a Judeo-Christian monotheistic background. This Christ, Christos in Greek, Mashiach in Hebrew, who was to come, we cannot be Muhammad because he never had that title. More than that, it was written in Aramaic. I don't recall Muhammad ever speaking Aramaic, and I don't recall those who wrote the document ever writing in Arabic. So obviously it was a much later redaction. There is no reference to the name Muhammad in this document, no reference to this prophet being a Muslim or belonging to the religion of Islam, nor any reference to the city of Mecca, nor the book of the Quran. He could have been anybody. I'm losing my screen here. Sounds more like an Arab Christian brigand employing the status of a prophet to gain himself more credibility and authority. There is just nothing Muslim about it. So scratch number 1. The Thomas the Presbyter is interesting because it only says a little thing, a battle between the Romans and the Tayaye de Mahmud. Now, Mahmud is the Persian spelling of Muhammad. Notice this ends with a T. Am I right? So Mahmud is Pahlavi, it's Persian, which is way up in northern Iraq. Therefore, it cannot have come down from the Hijaz. Thus, he would have to come from that area of the world. Take a look where that we're talking about. It is the Lakhmid region of what is today Iraq and Iran. Am I running out of battery? Is that the problem? Okay, note on the map the red circle where the Tayyari were located, way too far to the north to be the Muhammad of Hijaz. He fights in Gaza, yet none of the Muhammad's battle were in Gaza, nor that far north. As before, this could be another Muhammad, someone who is referred to as the praised one, an honorific title. When you get to the Battle of Yarmouk, the Syriac flyleaf, take a look where Yarmouk is. It's way up in what is Syria today. And it says, in January, the people of Homs in Syria took the word of their lives, and many villages were ravaged by the killing of the Arabs of Muhammad, not Muhammad. That's why it's known. He is known at that time. Now, the problems are this. The battle is well documented. And when it talks about the Arabs, it's where that, if you look up here, it is where that red rectangle is. That's where the Arabs are. That's where Arabs always lived at that time period. The Arabs defeated the Byzantines at this battle, but according to the standard Islamic narrative, Muhammad died in 632, so 4 years earlier. Could this be yet another 7th century northern Muhammad, thus someone who is simply referred to as the praised one? When you get to the Coptic Christian bishop, supposedly written from the 690s, he talks about Muslim here, which really is odd because we don't have the word Muslim that early. And he also refers to the word Muhammad, and he actually has the vowels in there, Mim, Ha, Mim, Dal, which shows you there's a problem here. Because how could he have vowels in 690? There are no vowels in 690. So what we then realize is you need to go to the earliest manuscript, which is written in 1602, Ethiopic translation, redacted back to a Greek translation, which redacts it back to 690. That is the reason it includes the name Muhammad and Islam, which were unknown in the 7th century. And that's why, therefore, you can pretty well scratch that one. What about the Sunni Shiite divide? If Muhammad did not exist, then no descendants existed either, he says. So how can we understand the Sunni Shiite divide? Why would there be a huge contention involving the blood descendant of a man that never existed? Well, the response is easy. To begin with, the first we even hear about the Ali and Muhammad comes from Sahih Bukhari. Also, Sahih Muslim, with the counter argument that Ali was not Muhammad's choice, is also found in Sahih Bukhari. So you get both contradictory reports within the same authorship. So that should show you that there's a confusion here. But now we pretty well know that al-Bukhari did not come from the 9th century. So this was from the 14th and 15th century. This is an Ottoman dispute, which is put back down onto Muhammad to then say who is the rightful heir. Remember, the whole Sunni Shiite divide is a political argument. Who then takes the reins of Muhammad, the prophet? You have to have a political argument, and you're still having this argument between the Persians and the Arabs in the Ottoman period. That's why this argument was created. But you need to give authority to it. So, as Odin was saying, you put the name of someone who was very important, the name Muhammad onto it, and you've got the life of the progeny Muhammad, and you've got, there's an example. I mean, I could go to King Arthur's court, but I'm not going to do that. Read it. It's absolutely funny, because you can do the same thing with King Arthur and Camelot. Pretty much everything we know about King Arthur and Camelot is fictitious. But don't ever tell Henry VII or Henry VIII, because they gave their entire authority comes from the fact that they're in the lineage of King Arthur from Camelot. Didn't exist. But yet we believe, but our kings believed it here in England, so thank goodness we don't have to go back to history to support that. Now, supposition 4, there is no evidence of Muhammad's non-existence, which is really a non sequitur. The person claiming that someone does exist bears the burden of providing evidence to support that claim, not me, so I don't need to do that. He admits that he hasn't even looked at the evidence. At the very beginning of his video, he says, well, look, I don't really need to look at the evidence. He's actually attacking me. He calls me my name. He says, I don't need to look at Jay's videos. I can pretty well shut it down just because of the fact there's all kinds of evidence for it. How can you even debate me if you've not looked at what I've said? Do you see the problem right there? So for heaven's sakes, at least look at what we're doing that. The fact that he has not even looked at our argument suggests that he is either naive or simply arrogant, or is being typically of Arabic, using a Arabic one-upmanship, which almost Arabs use as a way to shut down their opponent. The theories, he says, he believes, are only out there because those of us who perpetuate them use them simply out of a dislike for Islam. Now, while that is true, I do dislike Islam, I love Muslims. Isn't he just as guilty of disliking Islam? Which would invalidate his later arguments for Muhammad's existence as well, based on the traditions. So that argument goes both ways. Do you see the problem there? That's not a legitimate argument. Supposition number 5. Why would they create such an embarrassing Muhammad? This is the argument that David Wood threw at me at our debate in 2021, which he also threw at Robert Spencer in 2011 and just the debate last year. But have you noticed that David Wood has come full circle? That debate last year was really tongue-in-cheek. He knew exactly what Robert Spencer and us were standing for. The 200 to 300-year-old tradition are so embarrassing, Ibrahim says. Why would they write them for a man who they believe was their paradigm for all time if he never existed? And here's my response. They're embarrassing for whom? For you as a Christian, of course they're embarrassing, because you're looking at Muhammad through Jesus' eyes. And when you look at Muhammad through Jesus' eyes, he is as embarrassing as ever. Of course he's embarrassing, because he's not like Jesus. He's nothing like Jesus. But Muslims love that. Talk to any Muslim. They like the fact that he's virile. They like the fact that he's violent. They like the fact that he denigrates others. In fact, when compared to Jesus, when Muslims tell me, you think that we should follow Jesus or Muhammad? Muhammad's much better to follow. Jesus never got married. He never had a family. He never ruled anybody. He never went to war. He never stood up to any oppressors. He never owned anything. So who's more relevant for a Muslim today? Muhammad is. Hoorah! They love Muhammad. And we just walk into their trap by showing how embarrassing he is. No, he's not embarrassing to them. He's only embarrassing to us. So what about his suicide? What about his depression? What about his demon possession? What about his cross-dressing? Read the rest of the story, they tell you. Did he die because of the suicide? No, he survived it. Did he die or did he get depressed so that he could not act? No, he got over his depression. Demon possession, he eradicated the demons. This is what all prophets do. They all go through crises, but they don't get controlled by those crises. All the more reason why you want to follow Muhammad. That's why they say, thank you for what you're telling us. His homosexual proclivities, yes, but was he very homosexual with all the women that he had? I don't want to get into that, but can you see why? That doesn't work with them. Supposition 6, Mecca is not an argument. Boy, this is so big and I don't have enough time. Folks, you've got to go and see. If he says Mecca is not significant, he has not looked at our videos. If you want to take and shut down Muhammad and you want to shut down the Quran, the best thing to do is start with Mecca. Because once you shut down Mecca, I don't care what Muhammad you find, if he's not from Mecca, he's not the Muhammad of Islam. If there is no Mecca, then it doesn't matter what Muhammad you find or Muhammad you find, he has to come from Mecca. So it absolutely matters. Now in 1995, when I first did this debate with Dr. Jamal Badawi at Cambridge University, I did not have the evidence at that time. And I remember when Jamal Badawi finally came back to me, he said, the 10 evidences you're giving us are nothing from an argument of silence. And the absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence, he said, which is exactly the same phrase Raymond Ibrahim used. The absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence, which is true in 1995. I had no evidence. But this is 2025. We have all the evidence in the world. Now, he used the example of Troy, which is a non sequitur, since we have ample references for the ancient history of the existence of Troy. What we didn't have is where it was until now. Now we know where it is. Conversely, we have no reference from the ancient history for the existence of any place called Mecca. That is the problem. Why is Mecca so important? Because it's one of the 3 legs that holds up Islam. You take down one of the legs, and it comes crashing down, the other 2 come crashing with it. So if you shut down Mecca, you shut down Muhammad, and you shut down the Quran simultaneously. So I'm just going to go through real quickly the review here so that you all know what I'm talking about. They claim that Mecca existed from the time of Adam and Eve, which means it's the oldest city in history. They claim that Muhammad was there. Abraham was there in chapter 21. They claim that it was a center of trade, north, south, and east and west. When you look at the traditions, take a look what the traditions say. The Quran. When you look at the Quran, it's the first sanctuary, the mother of settlement, where Abraham was, where Muhammad was born, and the Qibla. Notice all those places don't refer to the place called Mecca. They don't say Mecca, it's just the place of the prophet, the settlement of the prophet. Only once does it refer to the word Mecca, and that's in chapter 48, verse 24. If it's so significant, it's the oldest place in history, how is it only referred to one time? When you look at the reference to Mecca, it always says in the traditions that it is a place that has streams going through it, that it is in a valley, that it has fields, that has tree, grass, fruit, clay, loam, grapes, grains, pomegranate. Folks, it looks pretty like with a lot of vegetation, doesn't it? Look at the pictures of Mecca. These are the oldest ones I could find. There is no vegetation there because the soil has been so depleted for hundreds of years, it can't support any type of vegetation. In the Quran, Mecca is referred to as the place of the prophet, but in the 9th to 10th century traditions, the Mecca they portray suggests that authors lived much, much further north. Let's go through a number of conclusions. I already went through that one. Since Mecca is the earliest and most important city in the history of mankind, it has to be the center of the world and therefore certainly known and best referred to. References suggest that Mecca had lush vegetation, fruit, grease, glass. I just went through that, but it's in a desert. You can't have that. Conclusion number 2. Ironically, if you look at the Arabic in the Quran, it is not from Mecca. That Arabic with the Alaf Maksura and the Tar Marbuta and the definite article all come from Nabatean Aramaic. That is from Jordan, folks, 600 miles further north. Sabbaic is the Arabic that would have been used in Mecca and Medina. They got the wrong Arabic in the Quran, proving that the Quran even couldn't have come from Mecca. Oh, I just done saying that. I just repeated myself. Geographically speaking, look at all the geographical locations in the Quran. There's only 65 geographical locations. 23 of the locations refer to this place of Ud, the people of Ud. That's way up in the north. It's up in what is Jordan today. 24 times refers to the people of Thamud. That's way up in the north. That's over near towards Egypt. 7 times it talks about the people of Midian. Again, all of these are in the north. If you look at the map up there, take a look at where they all are. I don't want to get this in my eyes. They are all way up here, but Mecca's way down here, 600 miles further south. So geographically speaking, whoever wrote the Quran didn't live in Mecca. Interestingly, the 7th century Arabs called themselves Ishmaelites or Hagarenes or Mahajurun or Magharites and were called Saracens. Look at the root of every one of those words. They are in the line of Ishmael, the line of Hagar, the line of the Mahajurun, the people of Hagar, the Magharites, the place of Hagar. These are all Ishmaelites and Hagarenes. Why don't they call themselves Muslims in the 7th century? That should tell you that we're talking with the wrong people. It is where Muslims contend that between 70 and 300 prophets were buried. Yet look at all the construction going on in Mecca today with all those deep foundations, and they can't find one of them. It seems that the Saudi Arabians know this, and that's why they're cementing everything up, and that's why they're building 62 skyscrapers there around the Kaaba, because they don't want anybody to see what we now know. When Dr. Patricia Crone wanted to find out if any of the civilizations had heard about this place. So she went to the Assyrians, she went to the Persians, she went to the Romans, she went to the Babylonians. This woman reads and writes 15 languages. So she went to the original documents for all these different civilizations. She couldn't find one reference to Mecca. So then she decided to get a little bit closer. What about people close by? So she went to the Savaites, she went to the Himyarites, she went to the Kindarites, she went to the Qadarites, she went to the Nabateans, and she went to the Nubians. All of those were just surrounding Mecca. She went and looked at all of their documentation from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, up until the 8th century. She could read all their documentation. She's the only one in the world that can do that. She was head of a department at Oxford University when she did this. She couldn't find one reference to Mecca in any of their documentations. So the suggestion was because Mecca was just too insignificant. That's why no one had heard of it. So she decided to go one step further and look at all those oases that are surrounding Mecca that are not significant. And that includes Najran and Sana and Taif and Khaybar and Tabuk and Gaza, all of these insignificant settlements. She found reference after reference to every one of them all the way back to 300 BC. But nothing for Mecca. Can you see what's happening here? She wanted to find out if Mecca was on the trade route, because that's where all the traditions say. It's on the trade route. She went through every one of those trade routes, from Sana to Najran to Taif, to Tabuk, Yathrib, I forgot about Yathrib, Tabuk, and all the way up to Gaza. And she noticed that there was no reference to Mecca on any of those trade documents. Nothing at all. So she went to the Red Sea document. She went to the Red Sea because she found out the Red Sea is where all the trade went. And so she went and looked at all the documents for the Red Sea. Nothing went through Mecca. It all went to the African coast. And the reason it went to the African coast, one word. Anybody know what the word is? Water. They had water. You need water to live. So she decided, well, where's the first reference she could find to Mecca? It was not till 741. That's the 8th century. And it's located in Turkey. So she went to all the geographical locations found in Ptolemy's writings in the 2nd century. And she looked at all the documents that he wrote, all the places that he put together, all the mountains that he referred together. She couldn't find any reference to Mecca. All the maps, all leading up until 900 AD, that's the 10th century, no map had Mecca on it at all. The reason is very simple. No water. No water, no food, no people, no town, no towns, no cities, no civilization, no history. It's as simple as that. How long did it take me to say that? 5 seconds, and you can do the same thing. Anytime people talk about Mecca, just shut them down with that simple meme. No water, no food, no people, no town, no towns, no cities, no civilization, no history. Now, despite that, Muslims have come back and said, well, what about the Zamzam well? Take a look at the Zamzam well. All of the water that comes out of the Zamzam well is only as big as that you see right there, 30 feet across, 50 feet down. That can supply 4 million people with water during the Hajj? 30 feet across and 50 feet down? No. We did a study on it, and we found that there are pipes going into the well, pipes coming out of the well. Follow the pipes. They all go down to these desalination plants. Not from Allah, as Muslims claim. I know, we need to stop there. Not from Allah at all. They're put together by Bechtel Corporation, Kansas City. We supply all the water for them. Thank God for America. Okay, I'm going to end with this. Now, folks, certainly someone, somewhere, at some time, should have known about this city, yet no one, anywhere, nor at any time has, proving that it has never existed at the time of Muhammad, nor during the early Islam. So if Mecca did not exist, then where did both Muhammad and the Quran come from? That's next, but we've got to stop there because we've got a panel, and now we're going to see if Bob can shut me down, because Bob has said that he's going to shut all of us down. Do you think he can do it? God bless you. We'll see you. Take a little break and we'll be right back.